Hi, class. How is everybody? Hope your first week is going okay. Online learning. And I hope your transition back to home has been good. I want to do a quick video just to talk about chapter 9. We will touch base tomorrow, Thursday, 12:30 on a Zoom. That way you guys can ask questions. We can just see what's going on. But I figured this would be the easiest way to kind of just give you guys some basic information on the chapter and sort of what I think is important. So I'll also upload my outline. So usually every chapter I just kind of go through and I pull out the things that are important, just sort of synopsis of the chapter. So I'll put that up there for you guys. It might be helpful. Just kind of pull out the things that are necessary. To start off, so chapter 9 is all about kind of taking our ideas and making them a reality, which is kind of cool. So we've kind of talked about basically looking at our line as from a merchandising standpoint at this point. So looking at everything, making sure we have a balanced line and assortment, and we're covering all bases. Um, and that's all great. So it's great to kind of feel good about our trends, feel good about sort of the materials that we have, and sort of have a really, really great plan to go forward. But now the conversation is okay, so how do we actually get the product and how do we get it made to be whatever we're thinking in our heads? How do we have that translated? So, it's a big question, but that answer is in the tech pack, and really falls in the hands of the technical designers and our design team and also the product team usually. So we'll start off basically. So if you go through chapter 9, um, it talks about basically having a standard process. So every company that you work for, depending on how big it is, usually they have standards in place, and usually it takes a long time to get these standards. So a lot of the time it's built by the TDs. So TD is short for technical designer. So the TD is somebody on the team that they do all the specs. So they're the ones that are doing the measurements. They're the ones that are doing the fits. They're the people that you want to talk to if you're wondering why something fits funny or something is pulling at the chest, or if the fabric that you're looking at is not working. These people are very, very knowledgeable, and the knowledge usually comes from years and years in the industry. So they usually have a design background. Um, but I will say, a design background is pretty necessary for this, but it's one of those things that, you know, going in from the beginning, you don't, as an entry level, you don't know that much anyways. So as far as what needs to be done in that certain role, so you're going to be taught on the job no matter what. Um, but essentially, yes, they're a designer. They know measurements in and out, and they are usually very detail oriented because it takes a certain type of person to, be able to sort of go through everything with a fine tooth comb and make sure that it's 100% accurate. So that's kind of a little bit about that role. If you love measurements, could be your thing. So, but they are a huge, huge part of making sure that you are able to translate your idea to paper, to a pattern, and then to a sample. So they're the person that's actually making that happen. So again, communication on your team is huge for whatever it is that you're doing and whatever part of the team that you are on. Okay, so anyways, so standards, yes. So they basically, as a team, you come up with a set of standards. So something that's important, something that that you use going forward. So they could be sort of a general spec, a branding idea. It definitely, what ends up happening is that once you sort of zone in on your target market, you get to know your customer. So once you know your customer, you kind of know what they like, what they don't like, and then you sort of translate that into your sort of your standard. And then what happens is that the team builds into the system your set of standards. So let's just say that you are working for a Missy, which is sort of that, middle-aged customer, Missy tops, you kind of set a set of standards that these are within the specs as far as measurements that we're going to go off of. And it kind of falls within those lines. And they do that in order to sort of have a branding consistency. So we always talk about people like American Eagle jeans because they've set up a set of standards that this is sort of where it falls within. That's important. And it usually happens over time. So it's usually accumulated over time, over knowledge, over seasons and seasons of knowing what works and what doesn't. And then it's sort of built up into the PLM system, which is the system that everybody is using in order to sort of build the tech packs and use as a product life cycle management system. And then it's also uses the strategic plan. And just to go over that, it's the target customer profile, product category, distribution mix, price point, and branding strategy. That's all important. Okay, so specifications. So basically 97% of all the clothing is made in the US is made offshore. That's huge. That's pretty much all of it. So it's very, very, very important. And this is the whole, if you get nothing out of this, else out of this class, you need to understand that communication is key. So when you're having things made, especially made offshore, so languages, the English is not their first language. So everything that you put down needs to be very clear and concise. A lot of the times, especially when we're having something made from our head, so we have an idea in our mind, and then we need to translate that idea onto paper. And it's not that easy. So sometimes explaining something is not that easy. Sometimes how you are thinking of it is not how somebody else would be thinking of it. So that's why these sort of standards are set in place, and you use sort of the general language to explain things. I'm trying to explain this way. So basically, sometimes less is more, but sometimes you need to put as much information as possible. So basically, you don't want to confuse them. So whatever it is that you put down on paper, it can't be like, there cannot be any room for confusion. So you can't be like, oh, they'll know what I mean. Oh, they'll get this. They won't. So unless it is exactly how you want it, I wouldn't leave any room for interpretation. Well, and we'll get into that a little bit later as well. But very, very, very important that things are on paper exactly how you would want them to be. Because when you are sending that over to somebody, you're not there explaining it. A lot of times we would actually travel overseas and develop directly with the vendor to eliminate that confusion. Because a lot of the times when you're writing things down in English or whatever it may be, the vendor can't exactly translate it. And even if they do translate it, they don't get it. It doesn't make sense to them, not all the time. So having a face-to-face conversation is huge, and you could actually eliminate weeks of work just by having a quick conversation with them and showing them exactly what you mean, and pictures and diagrams and actual samples. So all of that's very, very important. So sometimes it takes a little bit more than just measurements on a paper to actually get something done. It all depends on your vendor and what your relationship is with them. So if you've been working with this vendor for years and years and years, and they do a lot of things for you, and they do similar things, then you might be able to have that sort of wiggle room with them, that they could have some room to interpret something, and then they might understand because they'll know your standards and your company's standards. If you're working with a brand new vendor, you need to be as clear as can be. Nothing can be left for interpretation, and you need to make sure that they understand exactly what you're what you're getting at. Because if you send something out to them to be made and it's not clear and they don't ask you questions, and then you're just waiting on a sample 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and the sample comes back completely wrong, you just lost all that time. And then if you haven't sourced it with somebody else, aka put it with another vendor as well, then when it comes time to have your edit meeting or your line review, you have nothing to show. So very important that you make sure that you are very clear. Can't say that enough. Okay, moving on now. So basically tech packs. So there's two types of tech packs, to just sum it up for you. So the first one that they talk about is called the design spec. This can be called many different things. We used to call it a dirty PLM. So basically it was just a quick handwritten sheet. So basically what's going to happen is that once you have a design idea, um, you're going to give it a style number, you're going to give it a description, you're going to think about what materials, what fabric, what trims, what you're going to be using. And then you need to give it specs. So you need to give it measurements. This all happens on something, on a sheet. Essentially, it kind of looks like a tech pack, but it's almost like a quarter of a tech pack. So the reason why is it's just streamlined, because what happens is when you are developing and you're in season developing, you're doing a lot of things. So you're maybe developing a lot of styles. We talk about, depending on the size of your company, you could develop 20 styles, you could develop 300 styles, whatever it may be. You're going to want to get them out as fast as possible because time is money. We always talk about that. So basic thing is design spec. You need a sketch, a flat sketch, and the sketch needs to be accurate, because many times the vendor will look at the picture. Any pictures they're going to go to because it's easier for them. So if the sketch is not what you're looking for, you're going to get a wrong sample. So the sketch needs to be accurate. It can be done in Illustrator, or sometimes it can be done by hand, depending on how quick or whatever your company likes to do. You need a style number, a description. You should always have your company information on there. You also need materials. So you need to note on there what you want the garment to be made out of. So this is inclusive of fabric, of trims. So if you have a special button on there, or if you want, two different types of fabrics, that all needs to be noted on there. And you also need the specs, so the measurements. So these measurements are targeted, finished measurements. So it is what you want the garment to be at the end of the day. So, and the vendor will go based on those as well. So let's see. And then you want design and sewing details, so pockets and stitches, you want all that information on there. So this is going to be used to make the first sample, and it's going to be used to cost the sample. So basically, this is the one piece of paper that your vendor is going to get, and then hopefully turn around a sample and then get you an accurate cost. So in order to have an accurate cost, you need to make sure you need to have the information that is going to go into the cost. So materials, trims, design details, and measurements. So that's all going to tell you how much you're going to need. And then from there, you will hopefully get a sample made and you'll get that back. So that's one type of tech pack. So that was like a quick spec, I would say. So that is sort of it. You have the bare bones there just in order to make a sample and get a cost. And you want it out as quick as possible, but you need it to be accurate, because this is sort of your building block into your big tech pack. So the bigger tech pack is essentially all of that, but then just sort of blown up. They talk about different types of specs. So closed specs is when the company requires the vendor to do exactly as designated. So you send them the measurements, you send them the details, and they make the garment based off of that. There's something called an open. An open spec is essentially something that is used a lot of the times with like fast fashion. Is basically, it provides generic info, so basic measurements, basic blocks, and then it leaves the vendor room for interpretation. So this is important because a lot of the times when you are requesting exact things, you want something specific, and you'll get a sample back, and then you will fit the sample, and then you'll give them comments back, and then you'll be this, this line of approvals. So when you do an open spec, you basically leave room for interpretation, and you sort of eliminate those approvals. So you just have a quicker turnaround. So it's something that you might be shipping a lot of things quickly and maybe not a ton of units, and you might be happy with whatever it is that they give you. So definitely two different options. A lot of the time, I would say it's usually a closed spec, depending on the company that you're working for. So let's see. The other thing about a full technical package is that this is usually done once the style is basically approved. Well, the style is confirmed, so adopted, we'll call it. So, like we talk about basically developing, so maybe you develop 100 styles, but only 50 of those will actually get adopted. So, the reason why people wait to do the full tech pack is because it's a lot of work. It's very, very time consuming. You have to go in with a fine tooth comb, make sure everything is 100% accurate and all the details are there, because what it is, it becomes sort of like a binding contract. The vendor is going to go off of this tech pack because this is like law to them. And whatever the tech pack says is what they're going to do. So if your tech pack is not accurate, then your style will not be accurate. So this is why this is important, but that is why it's sort of saved to the end of the design process, because it is very time consuming and you would be wasting a lot of time because a lot of the styles don't get developed completely. They don't get adopted. Okay, so moving on. Specification libraries. So those are built up in PLM. So basically PLM is great because you can save all the libraries. You can save all of the information. So the styles are all in there. So you could say, oh, I remember last year we did a style like this. And then your technical designer could just pull up that style from previous years and then use those same measurements and then just maybe tweak whatever is needed. It's very important that you have access to the libraries because it saves a ton of time. The work is already there. It's like work smarter, not harder, right? Technical flats, you guys have all heard of those. So they're two-dimensional drawings. They're key components to having an accurate sample made. They're drawn to scale, and they need to be accurate. So the factories will follow these, especially because it's not usually their first language. So pictures, they love pictures. So call outs. A call out is a blown up drawing or picture in the design package. So anything maybe like a pocket or a neckline or maybe a design detail that you want to make note of, you would basically draw it, blow it up so that it's something that the vendor can see and look at. And it's clear to them. The more of those, the better, because it just shows them sort of anything that needs attention to detail or you think that they can't understand through just basic measurements. Do a call out, do a blow up, send them pictures, photos. They love them. Let's see. Okay. And then materials, it's important to have materials listed on the design spec. Just because materials is something, it's basically like 70% of the cost of the garment. So if you don't have the accurate information on there, the cost is going to come back. It's not going to be accurate. And usually when you're in development, there's so many moving parts. Things come in, they come in quickly. So if things aren't done accurately from the beginning, you kind of like start off on the wrong foot, and then you're sort of trying to piece things together that don't make sense. The other thing is that when you're doing your design spec, when you're sending something out, if you have a quality that you want to use directly from a mill, or maybe you got a card, a lot of time mills, fabric mills or yarn mills, they'll send qualities. So you'll get stacks and stacks and stacks of qualities for the season. And there are things from Spin Expo and different trend services and different trade shows that are sort of coming for the next season. And if there's something that you like, you always want to reference the reference number on the card and then maybe what mill it's from. Because what will happen is that if you put that on there, then your vendor will directly reach out to them and just go direct and get that to make the sample, rather than trying to source a quality on their own, which will take sort of double the time. So that's always a quick little pointer there. And then measurement chart is just a list of targeted finished measurements. So you guys have probably seen these before. We're going to get into this when we really get into our tech back, but it's probably, but this is sort of just an idea of what it looks like and what you're looking at here, and what the TVs will do to fill in to kind of get that sample made. And then the cost estimate is basically, sometimes on the design spec, there'll be a spot to put the cost estimate there. Usually when you get, if you're working for a bigger company, you'll get your sample back and it will come with a cost. So just basically this is a first cost. And when I say first cost, it's essentially just the garment. So it's not, anything is not included. It's not shipping. It's not packaging. It's not agent fees. It's just the garment cost to make it with the materials. If you are in a small company and you're sort of doing the pattern, making the sample on your own, this is a place where you can kind of put in an estimated wholesale cost. So you can kind of say, okay, I use this much fabric, it's going to be this much time, and this is my estimate, just to sort of make sure that you're keeping track of everything. Okay, so pattern making. So just to get into pattern making. So obviously the way that you can get a sample made is by, you need a pattern. You need some sort of way to get the measurements onto the material. And usually this is done by a pattern maker. So all you designers out there obviously know how to do this. But for any merch students, it's very important to also understand that this is part of the process. And this is sort of why it takes so long. This is why it's expensive. And this is why it's important to be clear in your direction with what you're looking for so that you can understand how the designer needs to translate it in order to get your idea across. So after the design spec is made, there are a few options about, depending on your company's size and process, on how you're going to get your pattern made. So there's in-house pattern making and sample making. So this is essentially that everything's done in-house. So you make the sample, you make the pattern, you make the sample. You do the spec. So you're doing it all. So this is great because you can control everything and you kind of don't need to worry about the whole getting lost in translation communication piece because you're doing it all. This is basically, you will do all of those things. You'll make the sample, and then once the sample's made, then you will have a fit and style session. So you'll put it on either a fit model or the form, and you will be with the designer, technical designer, and the merchandiser, and you'll talk about what you like, what you don't like, what's working, what's not working. You'll tweak it, change it, and then you'll adjust it from there, and then you will start to complete the tech pack. Anything that you do in that session, anything that changes, any changes to materials, any changes to the spec, all of that will affect the cost. So anything that you do to the garment needs to be communicated to either your sourcing team or the vendor directly, whomever it is that's making it, because it will adjust the cost. So whether you are in negotiation and you are taking things in, you're going to be using less material. So you want to see if you can get some money back. If you're making it a lot bigger, you need to understand that that's also going to affect the cost in a negative way. To use is going to cost more. So things like that you don't want to leave to the end, because usually when you're deep into negotiation, things like that, they really do affect it. So it's always a hard thing to do at the end. So pattern and sample making services. So some companies will contract out. So if you don't have a pattern maker in house, and if you're not going to make the samples in house, then you can send them out. There's tons of places like in New York, there's a lot of different pattern makers. There's a lot of different sample rooms. Same thing in LA. There's a lot more of those than there are around here. But basically the glory of this is that you will send them the measurements and they'll do the pattern and or the sample. And then once that's done, you can kind of take that package and then send it out to vendors to have them bid on it to see if they can, and you basically send them the package already done. And then you have a full package vendor. So this vendor does everything. You are literally just going to send them the tech pack with the measurements and the flat, and then the design details that are needed. And they're going to source the material, they're going to do the pattern, and they're going to send you a sample. And then from there, they're going to basically source it to a factory that they think is capable. So all are good options depending on your company and what the needs are. A lot of times with the full package vendor, you might bid to more than one vendor. So this is important because if you are questioning on sort of who's going to make it, if you send it to more than one person, you can obviously, those two people will bid on it and they will both send you a sample, and then you'll take both samples and you'll kind of look at everything. And then based on quality and also based on the price. So, and then you'll sort of weigh out which vendor is better. So I always like to talk about is essentially like price doesn't always win, because a lot of the times I've 100% seen it happen that would go with a sample because the price was so much better, but the sample looked like crap at the end of the day. And the quality, there was always some reason why it was that cheap. Because even just something didn't work out right. So definitely vet your vendors and make sure that you understand sort of where it's coming from. And if the price is that much better, why? Know that it needs to be sort of worth it in the end. And sometimes the vendor just is hungrier, or the vendor makes that type of garment really well. You never really know, but you got to sort of look at all options, not just the price. All right, so patterns. So pattern drafting. So pattern drafting is essentially taking the measurements from the body or the form and translating it onto paper. So pattern drafting is 3D measurements translated to 2D. So it's built on a grid, X and Y axis, and you're plotting your measurements from there. So they're called landmark points, is how you start to plot the measurements. And basically from there, that's how you, I'm just trying to explain it to you. I mean, that's really it. So it's an X and Y axis, and then basically you plot the measurements, certain landmark measurements, and then from there you sort of connect the dots and kind of make your pattern in that way. The other option is draping. So draping is on the form. So my handy dandy form is right here. Where is it? Okay, so yeah, here we are on the form here. So draping is just another option. Usually things that are draped are like formal wear, things that are more expensive, couture stuff, something with a unique shape. A lot of times something with a little bit more body is draped, but this here, I'm just showing you the sleeves. Thought it was an easy way to show you that. So yeah, both good options, but even if you are draping, you have to take it off of the mannequin, and it's called truing up, and you do it on the flat, and you can get your pattern from there rather than drafting it from an X and Y axis. So everything is translated on the flat at the end of the day. So, so for flat patterns, there's some few different options. So the first option is Hmm. Oh, the thing about draping also is that you want to make sure that you're using whatever sample fabric that you have, you're using something that has the same sort of body or properties. We talked about that. We talked about drape a lot. So essentially, you want to make sure that, if you're draping on, if you're sampling on muslin, but you really, your your garment is made out of chiffon, you're not going to get the same idea. And it's not going to look the same. So you want to make sure that sort of that sample fabric is very similar. Okay, so flat patterns usually start with something called a block pattern. Mm. So here is a sort of block pattern, or you guys might call them slopers. But these patterns are used essentially to create sort of a streamlined sort of set of slopers. So say if you are working in a dress department, you might have like 4 different blocks. So you could have like the sheath, you could have a sheath, you could have the princess seam style, maybe an A-line, and maybe an empire waist. And you would have these blocks. And these blocks would be these basic measurements so these styles are sort of styles that you use every single season, and maybe they change a little bit, maybe you manipulate them in some way, but you're using a sort of a sloper, so you already have it done. And that's usually in a sample size. And then so some other options of basically how you can manipulate them, you can basically do the slash and spread. So what happens is that you could take it and then you cut and then you spread it apart in order to make things bigger. Another option is adding in seams. So princess seams, they give sort of design lines, and you can add sort of volume that way if needed. So it says using block pattern drafting is cost effective because you don't need to start from scratch each time. You have a starting point. I use it a lot here just because it's easier. Have a starting point, and then I can manipulate it from there no matter what it is. I'll like just starting from the same thing each time. It's easier, and then thinking about it that way definitely takes time off. A knockoff is a direct imitation of an existing style. So it's like going to buy something in the store and then sending it out and having it remade in different fabric with different details. So again, not the ideal way to work. People do it all the time. A better way to work is if you wanted to sort of get a sample for inspiration, use it, send it to the vendor, but manipulate it, change it, design it in a different way. And again, the copyright issue. So copyright in the US, not the greatest. Some in the UK or in Europe, definitely a different story. But usually fit cannot be copyrighted, but you still don't want to get yourself in trouble. You don't want to send red flags, and no company wants to deal with legal. It's not fun. Another option is a trace off. So it's using the actual garment and actually trying to trace the lines. Not an accurate way to do it, but sometimes people don't have access to pattern makers. So they'll just take it and they'll try to trace it off and true it up from there. Not the worst thing, definitely not the best way. Let's see. And then patterns for production. So patterns for production is kind of a different way of working than you guys are probably used to working. So production patterns are usually made on the whole, not on the half. So if you guys see this, this is the center front line. So this is only half of the body here. This is the bodice. So you do it on the fold. So the reason why in production, things are done on the whole is that production rolls of fabric are not folded. So it's this big, wide roll of fabric, and the pattern pieces need to be on the whole because they're all set at the same time with as little space in between as possible, because basically people want to eliminate waste. Obviously, the fabric that you waste and is not used is money because you have to buy the fabric. So what they want to do is they set things up as close as possible and manipulate it in a way that the pattern pieces can line up together. And then what they'll do is they layer the fabric on top, on top, on top, on top, on top, and then they'll cut it all at the same time. So a little bit different. Um, and then let's see, it says patterns for production. So manual methods. So patterns cut from tag board. Pieces are graded by hand and traced onto a large piece of paper, and that covers the stack of fabric. Okay, so patterns also. So basically you start with a sample size. So depending if your sample size is a 10 or an 8 or whatever it may be, a medium, whatever you're working with. That's what you start. That's how all your samples come in. That is your fit model. So fit models, I don't know if we talked about this yet, but fit models, they come in. Each company has usually a fit model that they work with. They pay them by the hour. They're very expensive, but they're great because they basically, I think we'll talk about this in the next chapter, but they essentially, they help to fit the garment. But anyways, so the fit model is usually the sample size. So once you have your sample done and the style is approved and the style gets confirmed or adopted, and purchase orders start to get written, you essentially then start to, you have to open up the full grade. So usually when you send out specs, you're only sending out the specs to have that sample size made, just that one size. But if you run extra small to extra large, the technical designer needs to give measurements for each and every single size. And that is called a graded measurement. So the graded measurement is expanded proportionately across all sizes. So pattern piece needs to be made for each size, and then cut. Usually computer systems are used at this case for grading. The pattern is put into the system and then it's able to sort of spit out the graded specs, and the graded pattern pieces definitely obviously saves a ton of time because to grade all those pieces, it's a lot. Either way is fine, but I would say most people probably use the computer system for sure. And then, so the other thing is that a marker, you guys might have heard of markers before, but there's a cutting machine operator. So in a factory, there's somebody that's operating the cutting machine. They need to have a guide for cutting the pieces. So a marker is made, and a marker, their goal is to use 100% of the fabric. So essentially it's like a piece of paper that goes on top of the pile of fabric, and it shows where the pattern pieces are and how they need to be cut. I think I have a video for you guys. I'm going to put it up for you. I'm sure you'll love it. And then other pattern making technologies is three-dimensional draping. It's basically draping on the computer. You guys might be doing that here. I actually don't know. You guys can probably tell me more. But in your book, and then talks about basically creativity versus cost, is that you want to make sure that you are thinking about the bottom line, but as well as you need to get your idea across accurately. And you need to do it in whatever way is necessary. So a lot of the time, depending on sort of who's running your company and who's in charge, depending on the way their brain works, if they're more business oriented or they're more design oriented, you sometimes need to fight for that wiggle room a little bit. So if you are the designer and you have a specific idea in mind and you want it to be a specific way, don't be afraid to sort of be strongly suggest that things are done a certain way, while also listening to the people around you, because there might be a reason. But sometimes companies are just worried about the bottom line and what's quicker, what's easier, and what's the least expensive. And sometimes that's not the best thing for the garment or the style. So it's sort of balancing that out. And that's why I think it takes a lot to make this whole world go round, and why working in a team is huge, because everybody brings something different to the table. And that's the exciting part about it. Let's see. And it just talks about sort of sustainability and cost, and that basically the loss of skills and jobs in the United States. It's hard because nothing is really made here anymore because we don't really have the market. Um, it's unfortunate. So it's just what is it going to take to sort of bring it back here is sort of a big conversation, um, which we're definitely not there yet. But I think we should work to get there because obviously it's necessary. All right, so that is kind of it on this whole subject. But I will see you guys tomorrow. I hope these are helpful. At least kind of stinks to not be in the classroom, but at least it's something, I guess. I don't know. Um, but yeah, we're just going to kind of move forward and yeah, we'll keep on cracking. All right. Bye.